I would like to thank ICASA in particular for giving this subject matter so much importance. Unfortunately, many other jurisdictions did not see the importance of this survey. So this is why I'd like to make this special thanks for ICASA. The second thanks, of course, goes to Rwanda of hosting us. And I've always said, when I come to Rwanda, I never want to leave Rwanda. And this time, it's the first time I extend my stay one extra day so I can go see the gorillas on the weekend. So I urge all the delegates from outside Rwanda, if they can spare the time this weekend to do so. Today's presentation really talks a little bit about why do we need to know. Why we need to know, I put a small agenda for today, and hoping that some of the policymakers, whether are politicians or in the board of directors of Social Securities, really realize why this is happening. So initially, most of the Social Security schemes in the region started as a public service pension schemes. So we had one employer caring about his staff, primarily to gain loyalty, and the staff looked at their job as career for life. They are employed, they have a salary, they retire, they have a pension. So that kind of setup did not really worry too much of kind of potential fraud, because employees did not have control on their salaries. Usually the contributions were very long periods. Why? Because people started early in their career working for the government and stayed till the retirement age, so the contribution periods were long. So the financial sustainability of systems were okay. But as we moved into the eras of privatization and the private system start growing, and pension system within the private system start growing, unfortunately, most of the scheme within the private sector copied the rules and regulations of the public system pension schemes, without realizing that the rules and regulations really apply for a employer that meant somewhere how to keep his staff loyal. In the private sector, mobility is high. People change jobs from one employer to another, and usually they change for higher salaries. So technically speaking, by the time they reach retirement, they have reached by far higher salaries on average than the civil service have went in. And most schemes calculate their pension on either the last salary or the last average 1 or 2 years, 3 years average salary. So in the public sector, that behavior did not affect the computation of pension, the financing of the pension. In the private sector, that is a big effect. They enter late, they exit early, salary grows faster, and so on and so forth. This is why we start having financial problem initially in the private sector. In the public sector scheme, although it is not pay as you go, it is not really properly funded. A lot of time, governments don't pay the contributions that they are supposed to pay into the schemes, and when they pay late, they don't pay interest rate. So there is a big financial difficulty that public sector schemes that supposedly be some sort of funding in it is not funded. So this is the background of why we need to change. The last thing that I like to mention, that public sector schemes are by this sponsor, which is the government, and sometimes they guarantee the scheme, and sometimes they do not guarantee the scheme. But the government feels we print money. In the private sector scheme, definitely they don't have the luxury that we print money, so they cannot wait to reform late. In public sector scheme, they can drag their feet to reform because ultimately the government can take care of it. In the private sector scheme, they don't have the luxury of timing. So we wanted to really see who is allowed to change what in the schemes that we are looking at in East Africa. I'm very proud to say that the response rate when we ran the survey is almost 80%, which is higher than any survey I've been involved with. And we have ISSA representative here, and they run surveys. And usually when I remember the Secretary General talking about response rate, usually they are very happy when they get 20, 30, 40% response rate. We had a almost 80% response rate from this community that we are talking about. And this is a list of the organizations that responded. We have only one organization that is not a member of ICASA, but heard about the survey, and they responded as well anyway. So this is the group of organization responded. And the reason why I said around 80%, because when the survey started, technically speaking, we had more funds in Tanzania than actually became after the merger of 4 funds into 1. And this is why the response rate in Tanzania showed 5 out of 8. But actually, the Tanzanian response rate is quite high. If we look at it, who is left in Tanzania right now? We have 4 funds left, and all the 4 that left remain in Tanzania have responded. Being an actuary, we would like always to say when we fund a survey, we want to find some correlation to really understand whether the information made sense and what is the structure of the funds that we looked at. We have looked at the funds. We have funds that are less than 3 years old, and we have funds that are 90 years old. So technically speaking, when we talk about mature fund or young funds, we have a breakdown of 1 generation. Any fund that did not survive a 30-year-old generation, it is considered a young fund. Any fund that have survived 1 or 2 or 3 generations, that's a mature fund. So we realized that we have this kind of span. Also, we looked at the funds that responded by whether they provide only pension, or they provide pension and health, or only health, or only workman compensation. And during this survey, we had couple funds that are really occupational pension schemes. They are not really a social security scheme, did respond. They skewed the results, but we identified them and we took them out. As a matter of fact, this survey, this is only summary. The survey itself is published and it can be downloaded from the website of Muhanna Foundation. So that was the general picture of who submitted. Now we want to know the structure of this organization when it comes to authorities. We found out that most of the schemes have between 8 to 9 members on their board. Then we wanted to see if these schemes that have 8 and 9 are the old schemes. In the old days when they established scheme, did they have big boards? Or is it the young schemes? Or is it the scheme that have healthcare, or the scheme that have workman compensation? And this is the correlation we found out that technically speaking, there is no correlation between the size of the scheme, like the NSSF in NHIF in Kenya, which has almost 6 million participants, have a smaller member of the board than a workman compensation fund that is young in Tanzania that has a large. So we found out that kind of correlation. So technically speaking, each one of you guys can be able to know where do they fit based on the profile of their organization. Now we came to the crux of the matter. Who appoints what? And when the appointment takes place, what kind of authority are they given? The majority of the scheme, the chairmanship of the scheme is appointed by the president of that country. That's fine. But what is not fine is the DG of the scheme is also appointed by the president of that country. Or we have few of them appointed by the government, by the cabinet, not by the president. These we have found out that these organizations, although almost all of the DGs that I know at least, are competent in their positions, but technically speaking, these DGs answer to their president. They don't need to answer to the board. So this creates a little bit of governance issues. And this is the structure of the schemes based on who appoints what. And we realize that the majority of the schemes are appointed, the DG and the board is appointed by the government. Almost all the board meets quarterly, and also most of the boards have a very nice representation between employer, employees, and government. Now here I would like to stop and say the appointment on the board of government in public sector pension funds makes sense because they are really employers. But the appointment of governments in the private sector pension funds, the appointment of government is too heavy and too involved. And we have seen that in investment policies and so on and so forth. So then we listed in the survey all the potential parametric changes that could be done, whether the retirement age, whether the accrual rate, whether the contribution rate, whether the period of eligibility for a pension. And we asked the question, who has the right to change what? Is it the DG, the management? Is it the board? Is it the minister? Is it the cabinet? Or is it the parliament? So most of these parametric changes, because they are put in the law, cannot be changed except going all the way to the parliament. And this is why it takes forever to make any kind of reform. Before, by the time the management make the recommendation to the board, and the board take it to their minister, and the minister take it to the cabinet, and then has to have discussions and consultations, go to the parliament, and by the time it reach the decision into a bill, usually they would need another reform. So this is the problem that we are facing, and with this kind of results, now any fund that feel that, oh, there is enough authority for our DG, they will be happy. If they realize they have less authority, so they will try, when they look at the reforms, they don't look at the reform from a parametric point of view only, but look at the reform from a governance point of view, asking for lowering the authority level so that the board can decide a little bit more. They take the horse by the reins so they can really steer the organization faster when they need to steer it, not wait to go to the cabinet or to the parliament. So most reforms in the region have been driven by an actuarial valuation. Only few reforms were driven by market pressures. We also looked at the different reforms that has addressed, whether they were addressing the increase in retirement age or the other reforms. All this is detailed in the study. Here I would like to start concluding by saying that we don't recommend anything except one recommendation. We urge, if you are about to have a reform, keep in mind a phrase which is automatic adjustment mechanism. Try to build, if you have to put something in the law, do not put a number, put a formula. So you don't have to wait to be able to change that number every 2 or 3 years. For example, the ceiling whereby contributions are applicable on salaries for healthcare. Many countries put a ceiling, and within 2, 3, 4 years, the ceiling becomes obsolete. So it will be capped. So the contribution income to the funds becomes negligible. However, if the ceiling is linked to the average salaries that are declared the year before, then the ceiling is saying, okay, if you put a multiple of 3 times the average salary declared before, so every year the ceiling goes up, and every year an income comes higher which is never enough, but at least an income increases in absolute figure to the fund. These issues are very important. In many countries, they link the retirement age also in a formula linked to the life expectancy in a country. So these are issues that should be put in a formulas, not in a number, because you will escape, you would have overcome the need to do any kind of reform in this respect. On this, although I know Graham is here with us today and he spoke about the ISSA, I would like to mention that the Muhanna Foundation is one of the 5 organizations in the consortium of ISSA in training on the ISSA guidelines. And we are very much into this, pushing the center of excellence. So we work very much into transparency, and studies like this, after discussion with ISSA, I'm very proud to say that the African ICASA community was the first. ISSA now is asking me to do something for Europe. So I would like to say, instead of the Africans are always behind, we are in the forefront, and we will be running this study, hopefully, in Europe. Last, you can download this document from our website, and whoever would like to discuss it further, I'll be more than happy to discuss it. Thank you very much.